unemployment exists among the older citizens. It exists also among those who are inadequately trained. That is, those who do not have an adequate opportunity for education. It also exists among minority groups. If we're going to combat unemployment, then we have to do a better job in these areas. That's why I have a program for education, a program in the case of equal job opportunities, and one that would also deal with our older citizens. Now, finally, with regard to the whole problem of combating recession, as you call it, we must use the full resources of the government in these respects. One, we must see to it that credit is expanded as we go into any recessionary period. And understand, I do not believe we're going into a recession. I believe this economy is sound and that we're going to move up. But second, in addition to that, if we do get into a recessionary period, we should move on that part of the economy which is represented by the private sector. And I mean stimulate that part of the economy that can create jobs, the private sector of the economy. This means through tax reform and, if necessary, tax cuts that will stimulate more jobs. I favor that rather than massive federal spending programs which will come into effect usually long after you pass through the recessionary period. So we must use all of these weapons for the purpose of combating recession if it should come, but I do not expect it to come.
Senator Kennedy.
Well, Mr. Nixon has stated the record inaccurately in regard to the depressed area bill. I'm very familiar with it. It came out of the committee of which I was the chairman, the Labor Subcommittee in '55. I was the floor manager. We passed an area redevelopment bill far more effective than the bill the administration suggested on 2 occasions, and the president vetoed it both times. We passed a bill again this year in the Senate, and it died in the Rules Committee of the House of Representatives. Let me make it very clear that the bill that Mr. Nixon talked about did not mention Wilkesboro or Scranton. It did not mention West Virginia. Our bill was far more effective. The bill introduced and sponsored by Senator Douglas was far more effective in trying to stimulate the economy of those areas. Second, he has mentioned the problem of our older citizens. I cannot still understand why this administration and Mr. Nixon opposed putting medical care for the aged under Social Security to give them some security. Third, I believe we should step up the use of our surplus foods in these areas until we're able to get the people back at work. 5 cents a day is what the food package averages per person. Fourthly, I believe we should stimulate the economy. I believe we should not carry out a hard money, high interest rate policy which helped intensify certainly the recession of 1958 and I think helped bring the slowdown of 1960. If we move into a recession in 61, then I would agree that we have to put more money into the economy. And it can be done by either one of the 2 methods discussed. One is by programs such as aid to education. The other would be to make a judgment on what's the most effective tax program to stimulate our economy.
Mr. Niven with a question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator, while the main theme of your campaign has been this decline of American power and prestige in the last 8 years, you've hardly criticized President Eisenhower at all. In a speech last weekend, you said you had no quarrel with the president. Now, isn't Mr. Eisenhower and not Mr. Nixon responsible for any such decline?
Well, I understood that this was the Eisenhower-Nixon administration, according to all the Republican propaganda that I've read. The question is what we're going to do in the future. I've been critical of this administration, and I've been critical of the president. In fact, Mr. Nixon discussed that a week ago in a speech. I believe that our power and prestige in the last 8 years has declined. Now, what is the issue is what we're going to do in the future. Now, that's an issue between Mr. Nixon and myself. He feels that we're moving ahead we're not going into a recession in this country economically. He feels that our power and prestige is stronger than it ever was relative to that of the communists, that we're moving ahead. I disagree. I believe the American people have to make the choice on November 8th between the view of whether we have to move ahead faster, whether what we're doing now is not satisfactory, whether we have to build greater strength at home and abroad, and Mr. Nixon's view. That's the great issue. President Eisenhower moves from the scene on January 20th, and the next 4 years are the critical years. And that's the debate. That's the argument between Mr. Nixon and myself. And on that issue, the American people have to make their judgment. And I think it's an important judgment. I think in many ways this election is more important than any since 1932, or certainly almost any in this century, because we disagree very fundamentally on the position of the United States. And if his view prevails, then I think that's going to bring an important result to this country in the 60s. If our view prevails that we have to do more, that we have to make a greater national and international effort, that we have lost prestige in Latin America. The president of Brazil, the new incumbent, running for office, called on Castro during his campaign because he thought it was important to get the vote of those who were supporting Castro in Latin America. In Africa, the United States has ignored Latin Africa. We gave more scholarships to the Congo this summer we offered them than we'd given to all of Africa the year before. Less than 200 for all the countries of Africa, and they need trained leadership more than anything. We've been having a very clear decision in the last 8 years. Mr. Nixon has been part of that administration. He's had experience in it. And I believe this administration has not met its responsibilities in the last 8 years. That our power relative to that of the communists is declining, that we're facing a very hazardous time in the 60s. And unless the United States begin to move here, unless we start to go ahead, I don't believe that we're going to meet our responsibility to our own people or to the cause of freedom. I think the choice is clear, and it involves the future.
Mr. Vice President.
First of all, I think Senator Kennedy should make up his mind with regard to my responsibility. In our first debate, he indicated that I had not had experience, or at least had not participated significantly in the making of the decisions. I'm glad to hear tonight that he does suggest that I have had some experience. Let me make my position clear. I have participated in the discussions leading to the decisions in this administration. I'm proud of the record of this administration. I don't stand on it because it isn't something to stand on, but something to build on. Now, looking at Senator Kennedy's credentials, he is suggesting that he will move America faster and further than I will. But what does he offer? He offers retreads of programs that failed. I submit to you that as you look at his program, for example, with regard to the Federal Reserve and free money or loose money, low interest rate, his program in the economic field generally, are the programs that were adopted and tried during the Truman administration. And when we compare the economic progress of this country in the Truman administration with that of the Eisenhower administration, we find that in every index there has been a great deal more performance and more progress in this administration than in that one. I say the programs and the leadership that failed then is not the program and the leadership that America needs now. I say that the American people don't want to go back to those policies. And incidentally, if Senator Kennedy disagrees, he should indicate where he believes those policies are different from those he's advocating today.
Mr. Spivak with a question for Vice President Nixon.
Mr. Vice President, according to news dispatches, Soviet Premier Khrushchev said today that Prime Minister Macmillan had assured him that there would be a summit conference next year after the presidential elections. Have you given any cause for such assurance, and do you consider it desirable or even possible that there would be a summit conference next year if Mr. Khrushchev persists in the conditions he's laid down?
No, of course I haven't talked to Prime Minister Macmillan. It would not be appropriate for me to do so. The president is still going to be president for the next 4 months. And he, of course, is the only one who could commit this country in this period. As far as the summit conference is concerned, I want to make my position absolutely clear. I would be willing as president to meet with Mr. Khrushchev or any other world leader if it would serve the cause of peace. I would not be willing to meet with him, however, unless there were preparations for that conference which would give us some reasonable certainty that you were going to have some success. We must not build up the hopes of the world and then dash them, as was the case in Paris. There, Mr. Khrushchev came to that conference determined to break it up. He was going to break it up because he knew that he wasn't going to get his way on Berlin and on the other key matters with which he was concerned at the Paris conference. Now, if we're going to have another summit conference, there must be negotiations at the diplomatic level, the ambassadors, the secretaries of state, and others at that level, prior to that time, which will delineate the issues and which will prepare the way for the heads of state to meet and make some progress. Otherwise, if we find the heads of state meeting and not making progress, we will find that the cause of peace will have been hurt rather than helped. So under these circumstances, I therefore strongly urge, and I will strongly hold, if I have the opportunity to urge or to hold this position, that any summit conference would be gone into only after the most careful preparation and only after Mr. Khrushchev, after his disgraceful conduct at Paris, after his disgraceful conduct at the United Nations, gave some assurance that he really wanted to sit down and talk and to accomplish something and not just to make propaganda.
Senator Kennedy.
I'm no disagreement with the Vice President's position on that. my view is the same as his. Let me say there is only one point I would add. Before we go into the summit, before we ever meet again, I think it's important that the United States build its strength, that it build its military strength, as well as its own economic strength. If we negotiate from a position where the power balance or wave is moving away from us, it's extremely difficult to reach a successful decision on Berlin, as well as the other questions. Now, the next President of the United States in his first year is going to be confronted with a very serious question on our defense of Berlin, our commitment to Berlin. It's going to be a test of our nerve and will. It's going to be a test of our strength. And because we're going to move in 61 and 2, partly because we have not maintained our strength with sufficient vigor in the last years, I believe that before we meet that crisis, that the next President of the United States should send a message to Congress asking for a revitalization of our military strength. Because come spring or late in the winter, we're going to be face to face with the most serious Berlin crisis since 1949 or 50. On the question of the summit, I agree with the position of Mr. Nixon. I would not meet Mr. Khrushchev unless there were some agreements at the secondary level, foreign ministers or ambassadors, which would indicate that the meeting would have some hope of success for a useful exchange of ideas.
Mr. Levy with a question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator, in your acceptance speech at Los Angeles, you said that your campaign would be based not on what you intend to offer the American people, but what you intend to ask of them. Since that time, you have spelled out many of the things that you intend to do, but you have made only vague reference to sacrifice and self-denial. A year or so ago, I believe, you said that you would not hesitate to recommend a tax increase if you considered it necessary. Is this what you have in mind?
Well, I don't think that in the winter of 61, under present economic conditions, a tax increase would be desirable. In fact, it would be deflationary, it would cause great unemployment, it would cause a real slowdown in our economy. If it ever becomes necessary and is wise economically and essential to our security, I would have no hesitancy in suggesting a tax increase or any other policy which would defend the United States. I have talked in every speech about the fact that these are going to be very difficult times in the 1960s and that we're going to have to meet our responsibility as citizens. I'm talking about a national mood. I'm talking about our willingness to bear any burdens in order to maintain our own freedom and in order to meet our freedom around the globe. We don't know what the future is going to bring, but I would not want anyone to elect me President of the United States or vote for me under the expectation that life would be easy if I were elected. Now, many of the programs that I'm talking about, economic growth, care for the aged, development of our natural resources, build the strength of the United States. That's how the United States began to prepare for its great actions in World War II and in the post-war period. If we're moving ahead, if we're providing a viable economy, if our people have sufficient resources so that they can consume what we produce, then this country's on the move. Then we're stronger. Then we set a better example to the world. So we have the problem not only of building our own military strength and extending our policies abroad, we have to do a job here at home. So I believe that the policies that I recommend come under the general heading of strengthening the United States. We're using our steel capacity 55% today. We're not able to consume what we're able to produce at a time when the Soviet Union is making great economic gains. And all I say is, I don't know what the 60s will bring, except I think they will bring hard times in the international sphere. I hope we can move ahead here at home in the United States. I'm confident we can do a far better job of mobilizing our economy and resources in the United States. And I merely say that if they elect me president, I will do my best to carry the United States through a difficult period. But I would not want people to elect me because I promised them the easy, soft life. I think it's going to be difficult, but I'm confident that this country can meet its responsibilities.
Mr. Vice President?
Well, I think we should be under no illusions whatever about what the responsibilities of the American people will be in the 60s. Our expenditures for defense, our expenditures for mutual security, our expenditures for economic assistance and technical assistance are not going to get less. In my opinion, they're going to be greater. I think it may be necessary that we have more taxes. I hope not. I hope we can economize elsewhere so that we don't have to. But I would have no hesitation to ask the American people to pay the taxes even in 1961, if necessary, to maintain a sound economy and also to maintain a sound dollar. Because when you do not tax, and tax enough to pay for your outgo, you pay it many times over in higher prices and inflation. And I simply will not do that. I think I should also add that as far as Senator Kennedy's proposals are concerned, if he intends to carry out his platform,